Te Ahawich, good morning, tēnā koutou katoa. No arangi ko te rangi o ku tupuna, I whānau mai au e whakatāne. Nā te niki haere e tāku tipuranga kei te munga o Tamariki, kei te awa o Waikato tōku manawa. Kei Poneke hau e noho ana, tō Damian ni alahau, tēnā koutou. Kia uru ki te mutunga o te wiki mahi, me tēnei whakatūranga tuarua mō tātou rangatahi utunui. Welcome to this, the end of the working week and the second presentation on our precious young people. In this presentation I'm going to talk about a survey we did of the young people, 15 to 17 year olds, who are moving out of the care of the Chief Executive into independence. And before I talk about the survey findings, some research context, the context for the research. So each year, 600 15 to 17 year olds currently in the care of the Chief Executive move away, hopefully on a journey towards successful independence and adulthood. These are primarily coming out of youth justice facilities, out of whānau caregiving arrangements, foster care, and NGO residences. This cohort, the 600 people a year moving out of care, they typically have poorer wellbeing outcomes than the average New Zealand 15 to 17 year old who hasn't had any contact with Oranga Tamariki. The IDI tells us that this cohort is 10 times more likely to be involved in minor offending, 50 times more likely, or around 50 times more likely to be involved in serious offending. They're half as likely to have left school with a qualification, 3 times more likely to have wound up in hospital before they turn 20. So it's a cohort we're worried about, and from next year we've got new legislative obligations on Oranga Tamariki to assist these people. Primarily, we need to be keeping in contact with them and providing advice and assistance for them up to the age of 21. And then being available for more advice and assistance up until 25, and also up until the age of 21 we need to be providing them with some kind of caregiving support. If they want to come back to live with a caregiver, we need to help them do that. So to meet these new legislative obligations, we're developing a new transition support service, Oranga Tamariki. So it's an exciting new service. People are very focused on this at the moment, as you would expect, and it's going to help us meet these obligations and turn these stats around. So why did we do the research? Well, to build a systematic understanding of the transitioning cohort. So we had some insights from a lot of research in the past and from the IDI and so forth, but there's some things we don't know enough about the prevalence of certain needs and circumstances and the service availability for this group. So a survey was a way to get the systematic information about that, about the prevalence. And all of this is designed or intended to inform the design of the new transition support service. And if we get the transition support service right, then the young people leaving our care are going to be better prepared and supported to manage their transition. We do want to make sure that we get the service right. We know that it's often people try to set up new things and they don't work quite so well. And some examples of that include, the Wellington bus service. It's a dog's breakfast, as we know. Brexit, is that a train wreck coming or what? But there are some good examples where things do work out well. And like Susan here, I have a fondness for quotes. Possibly it's 100 years old from across the Atlantic, but it's so poignant, I'd like to share it with you. So this is from Franklin Roosevelt, the former United States President, coming out of the Depression of America, some bold new thinking. We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future. So, a huge investment approach and a break for tradition for the United States, investing in infrastructure and people. And for us, I think it's really poignant for our service because we can't keep these young people in care, but we can set them up and help them so that they're ready and they are successfully moved to independence. So personally, I think he's probably the best United States president in the last 100 years, the current one notwithstanding. Okay, so what did we do? We tested the need across the full cohort, the level of need. So what proportions were low, medium, high and very high risk. So we looked at a bunch of risk factors across the group, and we found that 40% were very high or high needs. So they're most at risk, and that's something like 240 young people a year in this category. So we undertook a survey of these young people, or about these young people, so that we could make sure the service was going to be informed by their needs, and if we can get their needs met, not only will we turn the stats around, but also the medium and lower needs people will benefit too, because the services will be available for them also. So just quickly talking about our methodology, we randomly selected 135 young people who we had identified as high or medium high needs, and we undertook a bunch of structured interviews, 120 structured interviews with the social workers who knew the young people best. So we didn't interview the young people, it was the social workers who knew them and knew the lay of the land with regards to service availability. And it was a structured interview around their relationships and their behaviours, their needs and the challenges that they're facing, the service requirements and the availability of those services in their area. These interviews took about 30 minutes. They were undertaken by a team here in Oranga, Tamariki who knew about high needs people, and we got a great response rate of 89%, which is, demonstrates the level of commitment from the social workers to take that time out, and also from this team who followed up with them and made times to interview them over the phone, whenever the social worker might be available. So between the 89% response rate, which was phenomenal for a survey these days, as you probably know, the high numbers of people that we interviewed ended up being 120, and the random nature of the survey, for us that's all just great. It gives us a real sense of, it's a robust methodology that's convincing for the likes of Treasury, because it gives us narrow confidence intervals and we can generalise to a wider population, which is the high needs cohort moving out annually. So what did we find? Just getting on to the results now. There's four main chunks to the results, so I'll move through them relatively quickly. And the full report is now available online too, so if you want to explore them in more detail, I'll give you the link at the end of the seminar. So firstly, we found 1 in 5 young women are a parent or a caregiver or expecting to be. 1 in 3 of the young people were in a new placement in the last 3 months, which is a relatively high level of instability, and that may reflect a past instability with the time and care with Oranga Tamariki, and it's a predictor of future instability as well, which is the worst case scenario is homelessness. And a third, not in regular education, training or employment. So that's a worry. They're in NEET. A third of them are NEET. And likely this reflects some instability in where they're living. It means that they're not connecting to services or schools if they're moving around a lot, and not building up the relationships that they need. And we found that 3 in 5 have a trusted, positive adult in their lives, which is great. It's really important for resilience, as the literature tells us, that someone there for a soft landing to support them, and they can learn from their mistakes in that context. But 2 in 5 don't have that, so that's a concern for us, and it's something that the service will be aiming to address. And 3 in 5 exhibit dangerous or risky behaviours weekly. So 9 out of 10 of these young people regularly were a danger to themselves or others, so that's alarming. 3 in 5 of them, 60%, once a week at least, they were doing things like lashing out and assaulting people, verbally abusing people, stealing, absconding, hanging out with dangerous types dangerous other people, this is what's coming through in the survey. And it was widely seen as that so it's low emotional regulation, so it was really spontaneous acting out behaviour for a number of them. So the second part was around health and disability related needs. So we asked around 3 particular types of health and disability related needs because we knew that was a likely feature of this group. Firstly, we looked at mental health. So we found that 4 and 5, 80%, had a mental health need. Primarily, or half of the cohort, there's 120 per annum leaving here, have a trauma or stressor related disorder. Nearly a third have an anxiety disorder like obsessive compulsive disorder, and a quarter had a depressive disorder. And there's a lot of interrelationships between these. If you had one, you're likely to have a few mental health issues, but these are the 3 main ones. When I think of my time in working in mental health services, half have a trauma or stress-related disorder. I think of 2 types in particular. These are the post-traumatic stress disorders, where something really stressful has happened to you, shocking, possibly before care, maybe during care of Oranga Tamariki. And these things really impact on young people more so than they do adults. We're able to put things into context that much more. And post-traumatic stress disorders are a syndrome of behaviours of panic attacks and anxiety and acting out, the depressiveness. So that's the stress-related post-traumatic stress-related disorder. The other one I think of is the emotional attachment stress disorder, where if a young person's been let down when they're younger and people haven't been there for them, they develop a reaction to forming relationships. So they avoid into forming strong bonds with people because they possibly expect the worst to happen. They're going to be let down, so they have a sort of standalone posture in the way they engage with the world, so they're difficult to engage for us as an organisation. 3 and 5 have a substance abuse issue, so half are smoking marijuana, a third are drinking alcohol, 1 in 6 are using tobacco and synthetic cannabis, less than 10% are being found with using methamphetamine or P, which we half expected higher rates of that. And the YJ population much more highly represented in this group. And again, if you're a 15-year-old sitting at home drinking alcohol or going out under a bridge or something, you're likely to be smoking alcohol or smoking pot or tobacco as well. Half of the people had a disability. These were mainly neurological disabilities, so a quarter of the cohort had a neurological disability, like fetal alcohol syndrome, autism, or Asperger's disease. And 1 in 5 had an intellectual disability. Things like physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, learning disabilities, again, we found they were less than 10%, so smaller than we anticipated. And just finally on health and disability, we found a high rate of comorbidity. So most of these young people had multiple needs, complex multiple needs. So within the substance abuse camp and the mental health camp, if you had one, you were likely to have more needs just within those needs. But across the needs, we found that 2/3 had more than one need type. So if you had a stress-related disorder, you were likely to be abusing substances. If you had a disability, you were more likely to have an anxiety disorder as well. So this is a sense that for this population, the needs aren't simple or straightforward, they are complex, compounding, and the new service is really going to have to get on top of assessing these and understanding them and planning for them, with an integrated service response. So thirdly, we looked at service availability and take-up. And across the 3 types of needs, we found a theme of patchiness and availability. So firstly, we've only got time to look at one. I'm going to look at the mental health needs, the 4 and 5 who had a mental health need. And the social workers told us that these young people would benefit from the kind of services they needed really were mainly DHB, children and adolescents, mental health services, from NGOs, treatment programs, and also from private counsellors and therapists doing stress-related therapeutic programs like dialectical behavioural therapy. So of these people with a mental health need, 7 in 10 were thought to have the mental health services they need available to them, which you can look at this two ways. That's great. Most of the people have a sufficient level of service available to them. But 3 in 10 did not. They may have had some partially available to them, but 3 in 10 did not. So that's a cause of concern for us, and it's worse in the provincial and rural New Zealand. And then we asked, well, so who's taking up these services and what are they doing to meet their needs, and are they meeting their needs? And we found that 4 in 10 were accessing the services and meeting their needs. Again, some were doing this in a piecemeal or sporadic fashion, but only 4 in 10 were seen to be addressing their needs. And there's lots of good reasons for this, and the new services are going to have to be very mindful of these, but these are things like transport issues, motivational issues. It's probably not a priority for a teenager to be attending treatment programs, and there's a history of suspicion of services and government as well. If not Oranga, Tamariki, they may well have had poor experiences also with the providers of these health services. So that again is another barrier, and of course they're optional as well. And finally, we looked at living arrangements going forward, because this is one of the things that we need to be on top of, because the new legislation requires us to provide caregiving support once these young people, or for these people once they leave care right up to 21. So we asked, what kind of living arrangements are they going to need going forward? And 3 out of 4 were identified as requiring some kind of supported living arrangement. So basically, roughly a quarter required 24-hour support. These tended to be the people with disabilities, currently in a NGO residence. Another quarter was seen to be much more able to be, relatively more independent, but they would still need some on-call support. So they might be able to flat, but they were seen to be best flatting near someone who could be there to drop, they could call on at a drop of a hat to help them. And we've got some really good examples of that with a few NGOs around New Zealand at the moment, working with Oranga and Tamariki, and these tend to have a flat on site of where their properties are, or they might have a cluster of flats, and there might be a supervisor able to live in one of those flats, and some young people are living in the other flats by themselves or with others, and they're kind of testing their independence and building up their independent skills, but they might need to call on the supervisor, to help move people out of their flats who they don't want there, their friends that pop in, or they might have a drug overdose, or anything like that, or it might be as simple as helping them cook a meal. And these on-call supports, living nearby arrangements with a supervisor, they're great for this notion of building up life skills, or scaffolding they talk about, starting with some basics like cooking some baked beans, and showing them, and then coaching them, and then they're able to do it and building up to more sophisticated repertoire of cooking. Same with hygiene, budgeting, emotional management. And the final one, regular check-ins. So a quarter were roughly needing, they could live in the community, they could flat, but they would seem to be benefiting from someone dropping in on a regular basis. Some of them weekly, some of them daily, just to check everything's okay, because things can spiral out of control pretty quickly. But these people were seen as closer to independence, but still needing regular check-ins. And we asked, is this person likely to want to say to Oranga Tamariki, yes, please, I will take you up on this new right I have to remain or return with a caregiver? And we found that 1 in 3 said yes, they're likely to take up that offer. And there's another bunch as well who that was uncertain at this point. So potentially up to 45%. So this is really important for us to have a sense of the scale of how we're going to meet these needs and think about that across New Zealand the range of caregivers that are available. Some will not want to have an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old in their house if they've got younger children. So we need to find out more about that, and the same with NGOs will have rules. So this gives us all something to think about as we're moving towards July 1 next year when the new service is going live. So the research has been designed to inform the development of the new transition service, and what we found was there's high levels of risk to harm herself and others within the transitions cohort, and in particular this group of high needs. And there's complex mixes of health and disability related needs, so it's not a simple group to work with. And this is informing the development of the new transition service. So regionally, on a case-by-case basis, the transition design team are moving around New Zealand, working with other agencies, health, ACC, education, and Housing New Zealand, to map out what services are available in those regions and what the gaps are. And then looking at those gaps and thinking, well, how can we address those gaps? For example, it might be with regards to eligibility criteria. Some rules, for example, with disability support services, you need to have an IQ of below 70 to access particular services. That's not going to work for some of our people, but they will still need disability support. So can we work with Ministry of Health to provide greater leeway on that eligibility criteria, or do we need to be thinking about providing our own disability support people? Same with accommodation. We want to be enable supported living if that's what the people need. We've got to find out which caregivers and which NGOs are going to be happy to keep 18 to 20-year-olds. Work with them to try to enable that if they're not ready, and be willing to work with Housing New Zealand to step into the space if we have to. It's also informing the scoping of the transition specialist roles. This is a new role being set up. It's currently being debated where it's going to sit. It may well be with a partner outside of Oranga Tamariki, or it might be a mixed model. And this research has been used to argue for the case that we need really low ratios of transition workers to the young people, potentially as low as 1 to 7. And also it's informing what that role will involve, which clearly is going to involve brokerage of services, building that strong relationship and trying to get them to go along and to engage with those services. And that's the whirlwind tour of the needs survey that we undertook, some of the highlights. It is available online now at that web address, or we can go to the Oranga Tamariki site and Google Transition Needs Survey, and you should be able to find it. Thank you.